All right. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Yana and Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Christos Xenofondos. I'm the Assistant Director for Rhode Island DOT. I'm here as the TPM Pool Fund Lead and as the Vice Chair of AASHTO's Committee on Performance-Based Management. Welcome and thank you to everyone who's joining our webinar today. And a big thank you to our presenters and the staff from SpyPan Partners that helped make this possible for us. First thing first, although, I hope that everyone is staying safe, healthy, and well during these days. It is appropriate that we are launching this new series of webinars in our Transportation Performance Management webinar series during these times to remind us of the importance of our work in providing value to our customers. The TPM Webinar Series is sponsored by the TPM Pool Fund with support from AASHTO Committee on Performance-Based Management Leadership and Federal Highway. This is the first of what is going to be an ongoing bi-monthly series of webinars, which will touch on a variety of TPM-focused topics. The series is modeled after the successful joint AASHTO Federal Highway TAM webinar series that has been providing valuable information on asset management topics every 2 months, going all the way back to 2012. So we will be switching off webinars every other month with that series. So there will be a TAM webinar in June and a TPM webinar again in July. For more information on this webinar series, just visit tpm-portal.com and click on TPM events under resources in the main menu. And you will find the link on the web, on the presentations as well. You can also register for upcoming webinars as they are announced. Links to video and slides from today's webinar will also be posted on the site. If you have any suggestions on future webinar topics or have questions for the presenters during today's webinar, please submit your comments or questions using the webinar's Q&A feature. We will answer all of the questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We are looking forward to your questions. In just a moment, Matt Harty will tell us more about the pooled fund. Right now, I simply want to welcome and thank all of you for joining us today, and with special thanks, of course, to our presenters. And now I'll turn it over to Matt Harty for a welcome and an overview of the TPM pooled fund on behalf of AASHTO. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Christos. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. This is Matt Harty. I'm the Program Director for Planning and Performance Management here at AASHTO. Decided to share my video so people can actually put a voice to a name to a voice, and all that good stuff with the with more of the web meetings that we're doing and the webinars. I thought it might be better or to sort of show my face rather than just sort of hear my voice. So again, I'm the Program Director for Planning and Performance Management at AASHTO. The TPM Pool Fund, which is sponsored by AASHTO in cooperation with FHWA, is very pleased to sponsor this Transportation Performance Management webinar series. We're particularly happy to see so many of you joining us for the first webinar today. I think we had about 160 people registered for it, and so that's really good. And we're also looking forward to seeing you on many more of these webinars to come. The TPM Pooled Fund, which includes 38 states and 1 MPO, is focused on supporting each other in the TPM community by providing tools, resources, and capacity building training and events. I'd like to mention just a few of the recent accomplishments of the Pooled Fund. Earlier this year, the Pooled Fund launched the Multi-Objective Decision Analysis Tool, or MODAT, for helping agencies prioritize a set of candidate projects across multiple performance areas. In recent weeks, we launched a training and informational hub to collect and make TPM training from multiple sources and formats available in one spot. We just launched an online training course, Performance-Based Prioritization, using MODA through AASHTO's TC3 training platform, and a second TAM course is being updated from an existing TC3 course. And finally, we are in the process of publishing a series of leadership and TPM practitioner videos as part of the TPM Now video series. There are 6 videos. There are 6 videos available right now on the site, and 4 more will be published over the summer. We hope you will check out all of these new tools and resources on the TPM portal, again, tpm-portal.com. So today we're going to share some of the highlights from the recent TPM Peer Exchange, which took place in November 2019 in St. Paul, Minnesota. I think you're going to enjoy today's presentations, and I hope you'll all learn a lot this afternoon. I'm certainly looking forward to it. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to Jana Park of SpyPond Partners to share our agenda for today's webinar. Jana, all yours.
Thanks, Matt. The purpose of the webinar series is to support the broad TPM community by sharing lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the transportation performance management community. In the future, we'll be presenting webinars on a range of topics from target setting to system performance management and communicating performance. As Matt mentioned, the webinar today features some outstanding presentations from the TPM Peer Exchange last fall. The Peer Exchange focused on how transportation agencies are implementing TPM in their agencies and advancing the TPM state of practice by sharing the experience of recent TPM implementations, the ingredients of good TPM practice, and the future of TPM. The event culminated in attendees developing a list of priority needs for the TPM community. For the agenda today, Karen Miller of Missouri DOT will kick off our agency presentations by talking about the challenges and opportunities of allocating resources for performance-based planning and programming. Next, we'll hear from Ryan Granger of Texas DOT, who will talk about how TxDOT is using predictive tools to improve their efficiency as an agency. Following Ryan's presentation, Deanna Belden from Minnesota DOT will describe how MnDOT has integrated federal TPM requirements into their agency's existing performance management system. And Kelly Travelby from Michigan Department of Transportation will wrap up our agency presentations for this webinar with how MDOT is aligning their information management, TAM, TPM, and risk management within their strategic planning framework. Just another reminder, please submit your questions using the Q&A feature of the webinar control panel anytime during today's presentation. We have a Q&A set up at the end of the webinar, and we'll take the questions in the order they're submitted. And in response to the most frequently asked question, yes, we'll make the slides and video available. The slides are already available in the handout part of your menu bar, and the video, which will be the audio with what you see on the screen, will be available after the webinar today. All right, so let's get started with our first presentation this afternoon from Karen Miller from the Missouri Department of Transportation. Karen is an organizational performance specialist and FAST Act liaison for the Missouri DOT, where she's worked for over 17 years. Her focus throughout her career has been on re-engineering processes to streamline operations along with performance management. She's an active member of the AASHTO Committee on Performance-Based Management, serving as secretary for the committee. Please join me in welcoming Karen.
So first, let me ask, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to share how transportation performance management, TPM, has impacted us. Next slide. First, I'm going to give you some background so you understand the framework under which we operate. So we are governed by an independent bipartisan commission who sets transportation policy and funding. We are decentralized, which means we have staff in central office as well as each district for planning, traffic, maintenance, construction, design, bridge, pavement, safety, finance, facilities, and procurement. MoDOT leadership supports this decentralization as they know the locals can better identify with people who live and work in their areas. And we do have dedicated funding. Next slide. Like many of you out there, there isn't enough funding. This existed long before we faced the impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic. Our goal is to take care of the system, maintain what we have right now, as that is what the citizens of Missouri have asked us to do through our long-range transportation plan. It's going to continue to be a challenge. Next slide. So we do have an award-winning planning framework, which has been in place for almost 15 years, which means we have very strong relationships with our planning partners, our MPOs and our RPCs. So the needs are identified at the local level by these MPOs and RPCs, and then prioritized through the districts to get programmed into the STIP. Next slide. MoDOT has been using performance management for over 15 years to make decisions and drive results through our quarterly tracker. We meet quarterly, about 150 staff statewide, to look at these measures, to discuss them, to figure out what we need to do to get better. And with these new times that we're facing, we had our first ever online meeting last week for our tracker, and it went very well. Performance management is fully integrated into MoDOT's culture. Each division and district creates and updates their own tracker based on the business needs they have. Next slide. So MoDOT recognized the need to collect transportation data to use in decision making over 2 decades ago. So we created our own system called TMS, the Transportation Management System, which links the data to a common location referencing system. There's GIS mapping tools, the pavement management tools, and many other applications in this. And this is an external web-based tool, which makes it easy for MoDOT staff as well as MoDOT's planning partners to access this data and use it for their needs. Next slide. So I just wanted to give you that brief overview so that you understand how all this works together and the foundation MoDOT has created upon which to effect change. So we've got dedicated funding, we're independently governed, limited resources, a decentralized org structure, very strong partner relationships, available data, and a performance management culture. So you can see that those 3 areas are under planning: performance management, data, asset management. That's not all, but the areas I want to talk about today. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about asset management. This started in 2006, shortly after Tracker started, which kind of makes sense because to do performance management, it goes hand in hand with asset management. And asset management was focused on pavement and bridges through various campaigns. So in 2016, we decided to formalize asset management. And because we have that needs identified at the local level, the bottom-up approach, this needed to be communicated to everyone, our district staff and our planning partners. We then developed a template and asked each of our districts to develop their own 10-year asset management plan. And when I say asset management plan, it covers all of our state roads. This is not about the TAMP, the federal highway required TAMP. That's only about 20% of all the assets the state owns. So this is a comprehensive asset management plan to look at all of MoDOT's assets. So each district uses their asset management plan to prioritize projects and figure out what to put into the STIP. Next slide. So asset management wasn't a new concept to anyone, and it's all about taking care of the system in Missouri because we don't have enough funding to do capacity building projects on a grand scale. It was a change for the districts and planning partners once we formalized this. So anytime you introduce a new process, there's always hiccups along the way. So we've made adjustments each year as districts and planning partners have provided feedback to us, and it's a much smoother process now that we've been doing it a few years. One thing this highlighted for us was some of the districts were underfunded in order to be able to maintain the system. Next slide. So I indicated we're governed by an independent commission. And for the first time last year, since 2003, we changed our funding distribution as a result of our asset management plan. So asset management, formalizing it, has impacted us in a number of ways. We've changed funding to be able to meet the long-range transportation goals of taking care of our system, which is what Missourians have asked us to do. Obviously, it helps us tell the story of our lack of funding. We've been talking about that for years. We have not been able to successfully pass the 2 ballot issues for increased revenue in the past decade. However, last year, for the first time ever in Missouri history, we did receive general revenue to help improve bridge condition. So that was a huge wow. And as you all know, asset management becomes more important than ever as we all face dwindling resources. Next slide. So I want to kind of talk about what I would say non-traditional resources or areas where you may not think when you think about resources. So as everyone knows, with our fatality and serious injury numbers not decreasing or not going down, we are facing a public health epidemic. In Missouri, we do not have a primary seatbelt law, nor do we have an all-text ban, and we know that behavior is driving up those crashes. So we were faced with no change in legislation. We couldn't make the numbers go down no matter what we were doing, so we had to really get outside of our box and think of what can we do to make a difference in the behavior of Missourians. And so we came up with a citizen engagement campaign called Buckle Up, Phone Down, and it's making a difference. And I want to repeat what this campaign is. It's not a media campaign. It is a citizen engagement campaign. So people are challenged to take the Buckle Up, Phone Down challenge, sign up. Since 2016, when we launched this, we have over 13,000 who have taken the challenge. And we did see a decrease in fatalities from 2017 to 2019. In addition, our seatbelt usage, which has been flat at around 80% for a number of years, climbed to 88% in 2019. So we can see, while you can't do a direct correlation, as Buckle Up, Phone Down made a difference, you can't measure that tangibly, but you know that there has been influence with this Buckle Up, Phone Down campaign in helping to make people think and also, do exactly what it says, buckle up and put their phone down. So I emphasize this because you cannot lose sight of how your citizens can be a resource for you and help you achieve your goals. And I'm happy to say that Nebraska, Kentucky, and Wisconsin have taken on this campaign and are launching it customized to what's needed in their states. There's 8 other states that are looking at it, trying to figure out how they can incorporate it there. So, next slide. Another non-traditional resource I want to highlight for you is our partners. So I alluded earlier, we've got an award-winning planning framework where the locals are helping to identify the needs that get programmed into the STIP through our asset management plan. So we had a very strong partner relationship when MAP 21 passed in 2012. So the first thing we did was set up a partner collaboration website where we were sharing all the NPRMs and just the myriad of information that came out. The MPOs asked for more engagement in what the FAST Act MAP 21 required. So since 2015, MoDOT has been facilitating monthly webinars to collaborate with our planning partners. And it includes not only our MPOs, but we include our RPCs, even though they don't have MAP 21 requirements, because we talk a lot about data and they care about the data, and we're constantly updating the data capabilities, as well as our federal highway partners, and then the neighboring DOTs participate in these webinars because we've got bi-state MPOs. So these have been very effective to be able to ensure everyone's on the same page and we all understand those TPM requirements. As you can imagine, we've been doing these for 5 years, and we have evolved to go beyond just the TPM requirements. Obviously, as we're trying to get these safety messages out, as we're trying to get the new processes in place with asset management, we communicate these goals, these challenges with our partners, who in turn communicate those with their local stakeholders. So it helps to have a unified message. This gives us an easy venue to be able to get the word out quickly. And it has strengthened, we've got a strong relationship. We have an even stronger relationship with our partners. So we're gaining synergy through tapping into all these, what I would call not thought about resources. So don't overlook them, as they, the citizens, your partners, can help you better utilize the limited resources that you have available to you. So next slide. So I've got the links listed here of all the different things that I talk about. If you ever see me present in person, I'm kind of like a show and tell person because I come from Missouri, the show me state. So I've always got something I'm waving when I present. So since this is virtual, I'm giving you the links so that you can click on them and see them. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Karen. Now, as a reminder, if you have questions for our speakers, just enter them to the Q&A panel, and we'll take them at the end of the presentations. For our next presentation, we'll hear from Ryan Granger from Texas DOT. Ryan is a planner at TxDOT, where he works on the Strategic Long-Range Transportation Plan. He came to TxDOT's Planning and Programming Division after working in TxDOT's Government Affairs Division. Before that, he worked at the Library of Congress's Congressional Research Service, where he did public policy research for Congress on transportation, business, and industry. All right, Ryan, take it away.
All right. Well, my name again is Ryan Granger, and today I'll be discussing some of the tools that we use at TxDOT in our transportation planning and programming division to try to predict, tools that we use to kind of predict and invest and create scenarios. Next slide, please. So at TxDOT, our predictive tools are heavily focused on performance-based planning, or PBP, which for us means selecting investments to most effectively achieve our desired outcomes. And TxDOT is currently trying to develop a more robust link between planning and programming, and that's really where these tools come in. And we have two sets of tools mainly. In development, we have two corridor-related tools that help us actually set the targets. One of those being the Corridor Prioritization Tool, or CPT, and that evaluates statewide corridors to identify needs based on established performance measures. And we also have our Corridor Evaluation Tool, or CET, which identifies needs It identifies needs on specific segments to advance them through what we call our project development funnel. Under mature but still evolving, we have the tools that we use for programming, so we can actually more accurately hit those targets. And the first one of those is the incredibly ill-named Performance Metrics Data Integration System, or PMDIS. And that combines data from a lot of our disparate systems, especially legacy systems, into processes the data and integrates it with Decision Lens, which is a commercially available tool similar to the multi-objective tool that Matt mentioned. And we use Decision Lens to score projects against TxDOT goals using a sensitivity analysis of the future impacts by those projects. Next slide, please. First, I'll demonstrate the last two, PMDIS and Decision Lens. So let's take a small group of projects and import them into PMDIS, which we can see here. And this is grabbing tons of information, much more than just these columns that are shown here, which are acting more as identifiers. But even here, we can see the TxDOT district, county, MPO, highway number, letting, fiscal year, and project class, most of which are freeway widening projects, or WF, with one interchange thrown in for good measure, and INC. Next, we send those projects to Decision Lens and view them. And we're going to keep an eye on that second project, the one that is 001513386 in Austin. And we're going to see how it fares. Next slide, please. And this is the sensitivity analysis in Decision Lens, which produces a score on the right based on the criteria provided on the left. And we can see that each project, or alternative as it's technically called right here, has received a score from the sensitivity analysis. Our project in Austin did very well and is at the very top. And we can see that the blue, yellow, and red that made up the Austin project score is actually safety, congestion reduction, and economic effect, respectively, which we can see over on the left under criteria. So that score is based off the criteria on the left. Those criteria were developed by TxDOT, and we can kind of see a better close-up of the project scores on the next slide. Oh, there we go. And so here we can see what it looks like so that you can actually see it. And we can see a close-up of those criteria weights on the next slide. And here are those criteria weights so that you can actually see those. So next slide, please. So moving away from the programming tools that we use to hit our targets, let's discuss our two corridor-related tools that we are developing to help us set the targets. Here we have a screenshot of our corridor prioritization results from our corridor prioritization tool. It helps us identify the highest priority corridors based on existing performance deficiency, and we can use it to prioritize corridors for further study. It's generally used to evaluate corridors that are about 100 to 200 miles long, and that can be implemented on corridors of varying length. But overall, it's just giving a very, very high-level focus on overall performance. Next slide, please. And here is the corridor evaluation tool. TxDOT uses this to split corridors into more discrete segments for further evaluation. It can track performance, it can track corridor performance over time and can be updated as the data changes. It allows us to determine strategic areas of investment and can even consider emerging technology applications. So right now we're trying to refine the automation process for implementation, but here we can see the dashboard with the performance metrics for the entire Interstate 35 corridor in Texas. So these corridor tools help us set targets, which we'll take a quick look at now. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So the methodology for setting our initial bridge performance measure targets are the methodology is based on just a straight line trend analysis due to the lead time involved with planned bridge work. All the activities associated with traditional bridge replacement projects means that work begun today on a new replacement projects typically won't impact bridge conditions for several years. So next slide, please. And here you can see some additional information about how our bridge division measures performance. Next slide, please. And here are some safety targets that we use that are largely come from our highway safety plan. Next slide, please. And for pavement targets, let's see, the data that we get from TxDOT's Pavement Management Information System, or PMIS, that translates into the corresponding pavement condition measures that you see here. So the data was used to develop the historical trends for pavement condition measures, and we use a 5-year moving average to develop those performance targets. Next slide, please. Here's an example of the system targets that we have for travel time reliability, truck travel time reliability, and congestion. Next slide, please. And this is what we call our performance crosswalk. This really answers the question of, after all these activities, where did our money go? In our 10-year plan, which we call the Unified Transportation Program, we have 12 categories of funding that correspond to federal programs like CMAQ and TAP, and also state categories of funding. For example, category 1 shown here in the table is maintenance and preservation. So we can see from this analysis that 45% of that category indeed went to preservation. We can also see that in category 8, for example, which is safety, 93% indeed went to safety. And because almost every category contributes to almost every key performance area, this really gives us a better idea of where our funding went. Next slide, please. So we have some cool tools. We have our performance measures. We can measure where our funds went, but we still have lots of challenges. In all areas, we have issues with the accuracy and extent of the data. To give a funny example, I was cleaning up data on our UTP team and scoring some projects. I noticed an interchange that was scoring oddly in the decision lens tool. So I inspected the underlying data, and I saw that it was for an interchange that was about 90 miles long. So if the data was right, it would have looked like someone built the Great Wall of China in Odessa, Texas. But that just kind of goes to show how important having good, solid data for the foundation is important, and we're still kind of struggling with that. But as I was saying, in all areas, we have issues with the predictability of investment and outcome differences in our state between federal and state measures. And in issues like safety, we really have the political optics of non-zero fatality targets, and there are some limitations of what we can control. In pavement, there are consistency issues between databases and measurement methodologies. For bridge, we definitely have to we have to adjust our state measures to match the federal measures, and under system, statewide measures have a certain insensitivity to investment that makes it difficult to measure. For transit, there's a statewide focus on investments, but there's a lack of real relevant historical data. And then we've got other issues like project performance versus portfolio performance and predicted outcomes, and the difference between our measures that affect investment decisions versus the ones that are required of us. Next slide, please. And we also have lots of needs. So similar to the challenges, across the board, we need many years of data to improve outcome predictability and decision making. For safety, we really need time and resources to update and reinvigorate our non-structural safety measures. For pavement, we need some time to align state methodology with the federal measures and fill some data gaps. For bridge, we need time and resources, again, to adjust states to match the federal measures. System-wide, we need to investigate alternative performance measures and/or better relationships between investments and outcomes. And for transit, we really need broader support for multimodal investment and much better data. Next slide, please. But to make sure that I don't end on a complete downer, there are some opportunities as well. We have the opportunity to use performance-based planning and programming for a whole life cycle of programs, help inform decisions on investment at the system-wide level, the corridor level, and the project portfolio level. And we think that as historical investment and outcome data are amassed, predictability really should improve. And we've also been looking more at best practices from other states and MPOs. Texas is a big landmass, but it kind of tends to be an island when it comes to benchmarking. So in particular, I've been really impressed with some of the planning, the programming activities at Arizona DOT and some of the other DOTs out there. So we're really trying to push the boundaries for some of those opportunities. Next slide, please. And well, there you have it. I know that we're saving questions for the end, but feel free to reach out to me if I can answer any questions. And many thanks for listening.
All right, thanks, Ryan. And yes, just a reminder, please put your questions into the menu bar there. So we're now fortunate to have Deanna Belden joining us from Minnesota DOT. Deanna is the Director of Performance, Risk, and Investment Analysis at the Minnesota DOT Office of System Management, Transportation System Management. Her group developed and maintains MnDOT's online performance dashboard and is leading the reporting and coordination of federal transportation performance management measures. At the national level, she's involved in AASHTO's Committee on Performance-Based Management as the co-chair of the Organizational Management Subcommittee. She's also a member of TRB's Performance Management Committee. Now I'll turn it over to Deanna.
Thanks. I'm going to presume everyone can hear me. So today I'm going to talk about, okay, good, MnDOT's journey integrating federal TPM into our performance management system and highlight opportunities and challenges that we've had thus far. And I have to say that pretty much most of the challenges that Ryan just went over will be woven into my presentation. Next slide. I like to start with a nice picture. This is the landing page of our performance dashboard website that we launched a couple of years ago. We track our statewide multimodal plan measures and other measures that are relevant to our customers on this site. And we are super happy with what we can do with the data here on this platform as we continue to try to improve it. Next slide. I'm going to talk about all of the federal measures in order. Somehow I just am numeric like that, like to go in order, so I'll start with safety. I just have this here to remind us of the federal measures, to remind us what's included. As a transition slide to the next one, please. So some of the federal measures we are reporting on our website when we don't have a similar measure that we like better or one that we've reported historically. For the safety measures, the 5-year rolling averages, we are not reporting on our site. Certainly they are in the HSIP and they are on the TPM state performance dashboards, but we feel they're similar enough to what we would like to report and what we've been reporting historically that we do not include them. Some changes now we've made due to the requirements. We will now be obligating 100% of the current year's apportionment to prepare for any redirection should we not pass the target achievement determination at some point in a future year. And also it's the right thing to do. So this year we've also had a change in how we talk about federal targets. Rather than projecting mostly mathematically, just write out where we might be next year based on the trends and other factors, we are now aligning with the goals in the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. Next slide. This says our safety dashboard. It's a great example of what we can do with our data. Here we have fatalities by county and time of day of the week. The red bar chart is fatal vehicle crashes with a blue line, the percent involving an intoxicated driver. And the other view on the right is the type of vehicles involved. Next slide. Our new strategic highway safety plan establishes a traffic safety goal of 0 deaths and serious injuries. So now we are using interim numbers on our quest to march toward that. For fatalities, that will be no more than 225 by 2025. And so we are relating these SHSP goals to federal targets. The charts on the right show what our annual federal targets would need to be to make our 2025 goals. And so this is a change for us to move to a policy-based target for the safety federal measures. And we know that this is not the preference of FHWA, but for messaging, this is the way we're going. And then now, of course, we're talking about the change in crashes and fatalities due to the pandemic, and that will be a conversation that continues over time. Next slide. So here's the list of the PM2 pavement and bridge measures to remind us what they look like. Next slide. So this graphic and the others like it are what we use to set our federal 2- and 4-year pavement targets. The measure MnDOT has historically used is RQI, or Ride Quality Index, measuring surface smoothness. The federal measure is different, including more items, and our pavement management system cannot project it like it can our historic measure. So we charted the MnDOT measures alongside the federal measure to see how the shapes mimic each other. Here we have the green is the MnDOT measure and the blue, the federal. So then we look at our projection, the orange, to estimate or maybe guesstimate what the federal measure might do. So we determined that we would use the targets we have set for our state measure, or pick one that's more appropriate. For percent poor, it actually matched up with our state target. For the percent good, it needed to be different. So I would say so far for pavement, we have not integrated. We felt that we do fine managing pavement investments with our current measure and pavement management system, though we have done an enhancement so that our system can calculate the federal measure, but it still cannot predict the future condition based on investments that we would put in there. Next slide. The federal bridge measure is much closer to the measure we use for our state measure. So for the first cycle, we simply charted the NHS good and poor and our projections to set the state targets. Those are the simple charts there on the left of the slide. But since then, our bridge office has created new queries to get the data cut just in the right way. And we have a spreadsheet now that can display the condition by the federal measure definition, our state definition, and then separating just bridges or just culverts. And so for the mid-period performance report that we are working on right now and the decision on target revisions, we will be looking at this very carefully, though we won't have projections parsed out in the same way. We will look at all of this and make a recommendation. Next slide. So here's our reminder on the freight and reliability measures in PM3. Next slide. So the interstate reliability measures are on our performance dashboard and scorecard. And so this is an example of measures we didn't already have. So we're taking advantage of access to this NPM RDS data set and have been happy to add these to our suite of measures we are tracking and reporting. And looking at reliability in this way is still new for us, but we're starting by publishing them, and we'll see where that goes. Next slide, please. So this is an example of a nice data display on our dashboard showing statewide truck travel time reliability index along with the MPO areas and seasonality, something that's possible with our tool now. Next slide. So for PM3, CMAQ and congestion and emissions, this applies only to our Metropolitan Council, and the region should be reclassified as of November last year to be in attainment for carbon monoxide. So this should be the only period where we will submit a CMAQ report. And I admit I'm assuming that happened, but I have not triple checked it. We are continuing with this reporting period, and we've had a surprise with a PM10 that is coming from a non-mobile source from a very small area in the city of St. Paul and Ramsey County that we have been informed we need to address. And so we are working on that one too. Next slide. So the repealed greenhouse gas performance measure, Minnesota joined a handful of states and sent a letter to Federal Highway Administration supporting the greenhouse gas measure that was originally included. We already have a greenhouse gas emissions measure that we report in our sustainability report and on our dashboard website. In the letter to FHWA, we included a calculation based on the methodology of the repealed measure to demonstrate that the calculation is not a heavy lift and that we think states should be required to do it. Next slide. So we found a need for a one-page document to explain performance measurement and the difference between our state measures and the federal measures. So this one-pager has color-coded side-by-side explaining different facets. And this is definitely from our perspective, a state DOT perspective, to help our leadership and stakeholders understand. This document is available on our website as a PDF. I'm going to walk through, next slide please, the high level of the different facets. So for our state measures, they allow MnDOT to track performance over time and inform investment decisions. And our measures, we have a broad set that goes broadly across Minnesota's transportation system. Here we list roads, bridges, aviation, transit, biking, walking, but also things like workforce and customer satisfaction. Next slide. And we would describe the federal measures allow the US DOT to track and compare performance across states and ensure federal funds are being used responsibly. And besides safety, that's for all roadways, the federal measures focus on key measures for the national highway system only. Next slide. So this is now where we've had to really work hard to explain differences. MnDOT's measures and targets are typically established through a long-range planning process, and a target describes a desired outcome or an acceptable level of risk. For our state highway investment plan, we have performance level discussions with stakeholders, and our plan includes expected outcomes for certain years based on the performance level, the investment levels. And we would say when an area is fully funded, then the target is met. Next slide. The federal minimum condition requirements and targets have caused a lot of confusion. We've been asked why we don't adopt the federal minimums as our target, since the person asking the question had interpreted that as good enough for the Federal Highway Administration. So we've had to explain that the feds actually want us to work toward the long-term performance established in our publicly vetted plans, and that the minimums are where then investment gets redirected. And we also like to remind folks that it would not be good planning practice to change our targets mid long-range plan cycle without new public involvement. And I understand some of the folks that had asked this are folks who will give input into our plan that our pavement condition is too good, for example, but it would not be the time during the federal process for 2- and 4-year targets to actually make those diverge from the direction we were heading in our long-range plans. Next slide. So this all evolves as we learn lessons as time goes on, and I've weaved the opportunities and challenges throughout, and I'll be happy to answer questions when it's the right time. Thank you.
Thanks, Deanna. And wrapping up our great set of presentations today, we'll hear from Kelly Travelby from Michigan Department of Transportation. Kelly has 25 years of government experience, including 17 years with the Michigan DOT. Kelly specializes in strategy development and execution, performance management, change management, and employee engagement. She leads Michigan's implementation of the Federal Performance Program and has been an active member of AASHTO's Committee on Performance-Based Management. Now let's hear from Kelly.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I first want to say what great presentations from Karen, Ryan, and Deanna. A lot of what I will be sharing will be somewhat of a repeat and possibly some areas of reinforcement of the underlying and foundational messages they have presented. I'd also like to thank all of you for participating in the TPM Pool Fund. It's definitely delivered a lot of great resources. And thanks BIPON Partners for helping facilitate this event. So there's a phrase I'm probably going to use a few times today, and it's one I'm sure all of you have probably heard fairly regularly, if not daily as of late. We're all in this together. Different meaning right now, but the same, I think. So before I really kind of launch into most of my presentation, I really want to encourage all of you to take advantage of the tools and resources at your disposal in advancing our collective state of practice in TPM. I tell you, I think our federal partners, AASHTO, TRB, and the things that we are doing together has been incredible, and don't miss those opportunities. So when I'm personally looking at how can I do something better, the first place I often look is at what other states have done, what our MPOs have done, our transit partners. I will be very candid. I steal kind of the best and brightest ideas from all of you. And I really, I think that's a best practice in and of itself. If you have a question, you know, I don't hesitate. I'll call or email, and I usually find the person, you know, responding is really happy to help. We all have unique things in our DOTs, and I believe there's one MPO, at least one MPO with us. You know, we have different challenges, we have different priorities, we have different expectations, but we have a lot in common, and that starts within this community. I think we have the best and brightest people who are really passionate about serving and have a lot of dedication to our profession. And there is no shame in borrowing ideas when they fit your needs. So next slide. Kind of get right into it. So we look at the definition the TPM guidebook provides. It indicates TPM is a strategic data-driven approach that uses system information to make investment and policy decisions to achieve performance goals. I think that's a great technical definition for the purpose of TPM, but I personally believe it's much deeper than that. Is it key for effective and efficient strategy execution? Absolutely. Does TPM complement more of the traditional financial measures that we've probably all used for a lot of years? Yep. But when I think about TPM, I think about it as being this very powerful tool that we can and should use to communicate how we are making a difference in the lives of the people that we serve. That's first and foremost the most important thing. It's improving the results through evidence-based decisions and provides us an opportunity to continuously learn as organizations. I had the pleasure of participating in a session at the 2020 TRB conference this year, and Mara Campbell, who was until recently, she had served as the TRB Performance Management Committee lead for a number of years. And in her elegant way, Mara reminded us that we can't lose sight of the basics. And she made this point in three very simple statements. And I think those are important to remember. TPM is a management tool for improved decisions that's based on facts, and facts matter, regardless of what the news might say. It's a planning tool for investment decisions and meeting objectives. and it's an accountability tool for both internal and external interested parties. So a couple of last points before we move to the next slide. Just remember, measure what is important and not everything that's available. Think about the law of diminishing returns. Before going all in on something, evaluate its net value. In the presentation I mentioned earlier, Mara gave a great example of this. If all trains run an average of plus or minus 2 minutes on time, does measuring to the microsecond really matter? Think about the resources of an effort in terms of the value for improving the lives of the people that we serve. So do the people we serve really care if it's 1.8 seconds versus 2.2 seconds or minutes? Probably not. But there's probably a lot of, effort and resources that went into that. Keep the option of buying data or applications in your toolbox. If somebody can get us the information, better quality data, faster, ultimately it might be more cost effective. And it's really important to take an intentional step back from time to time, really be innovative and open to alternatives. It's very easy to get tunnel vision and not even know it. So kind of my parting words on this section is be geniuses in your profession. Take the complex and make it simple. Next slide, please. So I am guilty of being a linear thinker at times. I like to put things in, nice, neat little boxes, categorize them, and think about them in a sequential order. And there are times and places where that's appropriate. So, however, when it comes to TPM, we really need to take a step back and think about the relationship that TPM has between asset management, performance management, risk management, and information management, how they overlap with each other, they complement each other, and how we need to bring them together when we're looking at our broader umbrella of strategic planning and management. So I'm going to start kind of with asset management. Michigan DOT has basically been using an asset management strategy, although it might not have always been called that, for a very long time. And in fact, a Michigan Transportation Asset Management Council was formed in 2002 and is comprised of professionals from MDOT, our MPOs, our county road commissions, city and township officials. So we are very fortunate in Michigan to have that body to help us through and maintain a really strong asset management program. When we move into the performance management, well, it's not completely separate because performance management has a very key role in supporting our mature asset management program, but expands beyond that. It expands beyond our management or our assets. It really leads also to the performance of our systems, our services, our organizational performance, and even looking and making sure that our people have like the tools and resources they need, that we've got the right processes in place to be agile and innovative and also satisfy our auditors. I don't know if anybody else has auditors, but we do. I'm sure everybody does. And in looking at our internal risk thresholds. So if I think about performance, Michigan established our first pavement and bridge condition targets in 1997. I mean, we have a pretty mature and robust program that has been built upon many years, but it needs to be agile and it needs to be able to kind of move as times are moving. And that included when MAP 21, the FAST Act requirements came along. Performance management plays a big role in risk management and helps us identify and respond to our uncertainties in managing our assets, our systems, our services. And then, of course, you can't forget about our information management. And while we traditionally think about information management, we often talk about data as it pertains to asset performance and risk management. It's really important to remember that data is information, and we need to be able to convert that data to help guide our decisions and to help us tell our performance story. You know, we have some, our citizens are probably more well informed than ever, and they have high expectations for us. And being able to tell that performance story is very important in developing that trust relationship with those that we serve. Michigan has really similar data challenges, needs, and opportunities as Texas. I suspect most of us do. I think Ryan really covered those very well. So, but I'll kind of talk about how these all come together. So when MAP 21 FAST Act requirements came along, we had some very mature processes already in place. Our challenge was very similar to what Deanna described for Minnesota. You know, how do we incorporate and balance our FAST Act requirements with our state programs, our state investment priorities, the things that our citizens have said were the most important? How do we translate our existing condition performance with the national measures? How do we forecast using data sets that we had never used before? There wasn't a lot of historical information, and how do we communicate the differences between the state and national measures? And I already mentioned, I have no shame. I really looked to borrow from the best, and I've looked at Minnesota and borrowed different ideas from them, including trying to help put together a communication plan that helps our folks understand what the differences are between state and national measures, state and national priorities, and how we're integrating those. So thank you, Deanna. Next slide, please. I'm going to very quickly talk about so when we went to implement the national TPM, we already had, Michigan uses a team alignment structure for a lot of different program areas, a lot of different activities and initiatives. And so we just expanded upon that. So we did not develop a separate office or identify a group of people that this was, kind of their primary objective. We really drew from the subject matter experts that were already in place in their respective program areas, in pavement, in bridge, in system operations. We did, and this was, already in the works, we have created a new enterprise information management office. I don't think Michigan's probably much different in that we have a lot of really good data, always looking to improve, but we had existing good data, but it's siloed. And so that EIM office, the creation of that is really helping us elevate our data and our information as an asset in and of itself. We evaluated our roles and responsibilities and kind of just to make sure that we're optimizing our resources. And we really strongly have been emphasizing knowledge sharing. We all have to wear multiple hats at any given moment. And to be able to do that effectively, you really need to be able to effectively communicate and share knowledge. And lastly, we looked at our processes and kind of our risk thresholds and whether we're talking about at the program level or the project level. So I'm going to kind of move to the external part. This isn't just true with TPM, but I'm going to use some examples, narrow my examples to TPM. So for establishing targets with our MPOs, it really needs to be beyond just collaborating and coordinating. We were very fortunate. We had a long-standing good relationship with our MPOs. We meet with them once a month. We've done that for years. We built upon that. We actually brought them into our performance teams for each one of our performance areas. So it was, internal MDOT folks sitting right alongside with our MPO folks, kind of working through the new national measures together, looking at the data together, making those decisions together. So it really does, I strongly encourage to think about it as a partnership. And then being very willing to share data and, again, that information, that knowledge sharing. Next slide, please. So I'm going to use specifically safety as an example here. What we want to happen and what is realistic can sometimes be very different. And sometimes we need to set our emotional response aside. So when it came to establishing the safety targets, there were many within the community that felt that those data-driven targets that said, we're going to keep rising, were not acceptable. Well, we agree it's not acceptable, but they are realistic. And there were some of our MPO partners that were a little reluctant to take that back to their boards, very understandably. And so it was a lot of communicating, a lot of collaborating, having kind of everybody at the table. And here are a couple of things that we did. We had our folks actually go to some of the MPOs and sit with the MPO leadership to talk to their boards, to share the documentation. We provided what we called newsletters, which really was very detailed information about our methodology for developing the targets, not just for safety, but for the other areas. We kind of left that, as a service available. We provided the MPO targets to them, and again, in a few instances, we sat with some folks and their boards and really kind of walked and talked them through it. We did not. We actually we missed 2 of our 5 targets, our safety targets, by an incredibly narrow margin. And the consequence of that, the result of that, is we now need to develop an implementation plan, but we are also losing flexibility in our program funding, right? That's part of the penalty. I don't think anyone in Michigan would ever say we should invest less in safety. That's not the message. That's not the takeaway. But as we are all looking at the impacts, I mean, this is a unfortunate example. Our current state, we are going to have to make some very hard decisions about our programs, and we need to be, have the ability to be as flexible with our program funding as possible. And so this is, this is going to impact us. Next slide. So that was, that is the importance of being data driven and realistic, even if our emotional response to that rejects it, and especially in terms of safety. So the last piece I want to talk about, and if you've looked at the performance-based planning and programming guide that came out in 2013, you might recognize this, sort of. It's been modified. Right now, MDOT is working on our 2045 long-range plan, and there's some things that we have done a little bit differently. We are approaching this plan as a true state of Michigan plan, not an MDOT plan. We've been very intentional with our goals We've just now drafted some objectives. They're not through the approval process, so this objective has not necessarily been approved yet. And then developing our long-term strategies. And again, we are being very intentionally inclusive. So we are creating a space or an opportunity for our partners to align. So with our objective, any objective that you will see in our long-range plan really is not mode specific, and it's not MDOT specific. And if our partners would like to join us in using the same or similar language, we welcome that. We welcome the alignment. When we start developing our long-term strategies, which is something we're currently working on, again, they will be developed. Now, I put these on here just as an example. These are not our actual strategies, but as an example that we're, our strategies are going to start to maybe be more mode specific, implementing our strategic highway safety plan. Well, that's not just MDOT, that's the state of Michigan plan, implementing transit safety plans. Actually, MDOT doesn't have the transit. We support our transit agencies and support their plans, so that as we move down into the intermediate strategies and the short-term strategies, which really the short-term will align with our STIP and our 5-year program, those do become more MDOT specific, and our partners that may have decided, hey, we'd like to partner with you and align our objectives, or our objectives, we can show how they align with the state of Michigan objectives. They can start to develop their own intermediate strategies, their short-term strategies, their long-term strategies as needed. The takeaway from this, though, is that very intentional state of Michigan plan, not specific to MDOT until we start getting into kind of the intermediate and short-term strategies. And our performance measures will follow along the same pattern. So thank you for your time. Next slide. Thank you for your time. I hope all of you please take care, and I hope all of you be safe.
Thank you, Kelly. All right, that concludes our presentations for today. Thank you to all our presenters, and now it's time for the Q&A, and thank you to all who submitted questions. So let's get started, and people can keep adding to the questions as you hear the questions that are being asked. So let's start with the first question is for Karen from Alan Ward. Do service level needs play a role in the development of your asset management plan, or is the plan largely focused on condition needs of your pavements and bridges?
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the question, Alan. When we did our initial asset management plan, very focused on pavement and bridges. We wanted to get through a couple iterations, make the improvements, get everybody used to the process, work out the hiccups, make sure we were solid in our assumptions and analysis and computations with all the pavement and bridges. So we have just recently asked the districts to add the mobility assets, signals, ITS, and overhead signs, to add that to asset management, and it primarily affects our urban areas in Kansas City and St. Louis. And obviously that's connected to level of service.
All right, the next question is also for you, Karen, and it's from Helene Roberts. Does MoDOT have other NHS owners besides itself? How does MoDOT engage these other owners in the asset management process for the TAM?
So the majority of NHS is owned by us, MoDOT. I think we've got around 200 miles that is primarily, again, in Kansas City and St. Louis, that's owned by the locals. So we when we send our ARAN van out to collect the pavement data, we cover all the NHS, so we collect data for that. So again, if you think about our planning process, we involve the locals. They have technical, the MPOs in Kansas City and St. Louis, they have technical advisory committees. We have a representative from central office as well as the district sitting on those technical advisory committees where they're looking at how they're going to spend the funding and how they prioritize projects. So we have involved them, like I said, for over 15 years. We've sat at the table with them. And I know when, specifically when Mark out of Kansas City looked at their road and bridge pavement measures and their goals, they had to make a decision, are they going to support the state or do their own? And they decided to do their own, and they had a whole TPM work group that met for over a year. Again, we sat at the table with them when they're looking at, what do they want those targets to be? And then that gets incorporated into the asset management plan. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Karen. The next question is for Ryan from Alan Ward. The projects that you're using for the demonstration all appear to have capacity improvement. How do you go about prioritizing corridors which need only preservation types of work? Ryan, are you maybe muted? Let's see. Ryan, we're not able to hear you. So I don't know. You need to unmute yourself for us to be able to hear you. All right, why don't we move on, and hopefully Ryan will be able to get back on with us. So for Deanna, this is from Alan as well. 2 questions. So they're on your PM3 measures. First, do you have a process for QCing changes to the NPRMDS, TMCS, and shape files? Let's start with that one first.
Oh, okay. I have a smart analyst who works on our NPM RDS data, and he actually checks on missing links and things like that and lets the CAT lab know. Is that what you're asking? Because after that, there was a bunch of stuff I had more trouble understanding in that technical question.
Okay, yeah, so you see, and his additional questions are also your charts included data from both the INRIX provided data as well as the previous HERE data. How were you able to relate the 2 data sources given their differences in data collection methods? So I think he's asking
yeah, we just noted
the alignment.
Oh yeah, we noted that they were different, but we just thought that it was interesting to have that history, but we realized that they would not be an exact match. So I would say we did not do anything to align them. We just noted that there was a data provider change. But I'd be happy to put you in touch with my who I call my smart analyst to discuss these things in a more coherent fashion.
All right, good. All right, a question for Karen from Sharad Rana, and the question is your asset management plan integrated with STIP? Is the TAMP implemented department-wide, meaning all sections or divisions are actively involved in practicing asset management? Is it feasible? If it is feasible, can you describe how the process works, or they'll contact you later at your convenience? Karen.
So yes, that's the beauty of formalizing. First, can you hear me? I assume that.
Yes.
I should stop and ask that. Okay. So first, that's the beauty of making asset management formal. So every single project that goes into the STIP is driven by that district's asset management plan. So they develop the asset management plan first. They meet with their local partners, decide what they're going to prioritize. We provide a template to them, and the AMP give an average number of miles and square feet of bridges to target for the STIP. There's costs associated in those templates, and so they're looking at this myriad of data, weighing it against the needs, which are obviously much more than what's available, and then they're sitting down, figuring out what do we want to elevate, and we need to, and integrated in all this asset management plan are the performance goals. We've got safety, we've got, they need to keep the pavement, the bridge, everything in at a certain condition level. So if you look at the link that is in my presentation, it kind of goes through and describes the asset management process. So I encourage you to do that. And just like everything that we do, every time we introduce a new process, we measure ourselves against, hey, this is what we said we were going to program with asset management versus what actually came out of our STIP. So we've got we've got graphs where we're looking and comparing ourselves, our asset management plan against the STIP. And that's how we know, it's like, okay, we've got glitches in here and we're going to make process improvements, or, and if a district knows by now, after having gone through it multiple times, that very seldom is their initial asset management plan accepted as is. There's always a challenge of, you need to go back and refine your numbers, or you need to go back and take a closer look. Are you scoping the projects right, or whatever the case may be? And it's our executive team that are on these calls looking at, and we do it one by one with each of the districts. It's our executive team that are on the calls that are calling them out and saying, hey, this doesn't make sense, explain it. Sometimes there's an explanation, sometimes they got to go back and do it again. So it's very intensive. Anytime you do anything decentralized, it becomes much more intensive. One district doesn't do it the exact same way as the other. You've got urban areas versus rural areas. So there's all these things that you take into consideration. But once the districts understood, hey, I'm going to be held accountable to this, the process just gets better every year. So once you look at that link, if you've got more questions, just please let me know.
Thanks, Karen. So, Ryan, are you able to unmute? I think we're having an audio issue, but I have a question for all of you. So how is the current pandemic influencing your thinking about TPM at your agency? That's kind of a broad question. Who wants to start? How about Kelly?
Sure. There's several different ways that we are thinking about this, and I'm probably only going to think of one or two. In terms of our program funding, how is that going to impact our 4-year targets? How definitely is going to, program funding is definitely going to have a big hit. So how do we manage our conditions, which were already declining? We had declining targets across the board. How are we going to manage that with such severe impacts? And how is that going to impact our 4-year targets? And how is that going to impact the next the next program, the next performance period? Another way is like with our reliability measures. This is, this change in traffic pattern. what is going to be the, you know, with more people having had the opportunity to telecommute, for example, which organizations are going to make that maybe more of a mainstay, and, you know, less brick and mortar, less folks actually traveling, the impact to our transit system, and with our transit measures. I mean, just the list is probably pretty long for all of us, whether we're thinking about our, you know, state targets or our national targets.
Deanna, how about you?
Yeah, the conversations we've had so far, I mean, right now we were looking at safety mostly and wondering if the federal highway would be easing up, where we're going to have potentially more fatal crashes, but a lower traffic volume, so those rates would go up. And we'll be discussing, you know, what we want to do with those targets. However, you know, as it stands right now, we like our new strategic highway safety plan, but definitely discussions are going to happen on that. And I mean, my guess was that federal highway would not ease up, but we will remain to be seen on that. And that I was saying for this year, it's fine because we're looking at last year's data, but moving forward, it may look different.
Thanks, Deanna. How about you, Karen?
So obviously agree with what they both said, the lack of resources, how to make progress towards targets. We just this month made a decision to not update our STIP. We do an annual update every year. But with the uncertainty due to revenues, because we view each of the STIP projects as a promise to the public to complete those projects, then it was decided we're not going to do the annual update. We're going to focus on keeping our projects in the STIP. And then if something changes, we can always amend it and add more. Remember that, you know, everything that's in the STIP is driven by our asset management processes. So, you know, we're not going to see, just like it takes a long time to impact pavement and bridge targets, it's going to take a long time for those pavement and bridge conditions to deteriorate. You know, it's not going to change in a year. It's not going to change in 2 years. So there'll be a huge challenge on that in the future. And so, yeah, is Ryan able to join us?
I don't think so. So we'll have to ask him later. So one sentence response from each of you. Oh, Ryan, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I
right.
got to hop off, but yeah. Did you need me?
Okay. Yes, there are 2 questions for you.
Yeah.
So the first one is, the project that you're using for the demonstration all appear to have capacity improvements. How do you go about prioritizing corridors which need only preservation types of work?
That is a good question. That goes through a slightly different methodology. Our Unified Transportation Program, our 10-year program, is mainly for large capacity building projects. Most of our maintenance and preservation needs, there isn't much, as much coordination, there isn't as much risk, so it goes through a slightly different process. So yeah, that's a good question. Do I need to follow up with anybody about that?
That's from Alan Ward from New York State DOT. So yes, you could follow up with him. We can connect the 2 of you. And then a question from Don Sullivan from Oklahoma DOT, to your neighbor. In the corridor prioritization tool, how does system importance come into play? Is it traffic-based, condition-based? What factors are weighted and how?
Gotcha. That one I'd have to look into a little bit more, since those tools are still under development and are changing all the time. But I guess that would it be possible to have those emailed to me?
Yeah, sure, we'll do that. And then we'll connect the folks. There's a question, and maybe, let's see, do you have a protocol for, I think this might be for Karen, or it could be for you, Ryan. Do you have a protocol for setting targets for other assets, delay, traffic signals, and traffic optimization, etc., other than bridges and pavement targets? Maybe this is to any of you, if you have an answer.
So this is Karen. In our tracker publication, and again, there's a link to that at the end, we set targets on a lot of measures, and it's very context driven depending on what we're measuring, because sometimes you measure widgets, sometimes you measure outcomes. So there's lots in there in terms of targets for the tracker, and if there's specific questions on that, you can follow up with me on it.
Sounds good. All right, so just a quick comment from Pete Stefanos. Just a clarifying note, states are able to provide extenuating circumstances for all targets with the exception of the safety targets to explain why events that they could not have envisioned when targets were set had prevented them from achieving their target. I think that's just in response to the earlier comment. All right, so I think we've run over time, and let's just, in closing now, as Christos mentioned earlier, this is the first of our bi-monthly webinar series for TPM. The next webinar will be held in 2 months on July 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So it's always going to be the third Wednesday every other month, and then the other every other month is when the TAM webinar is. So will be a monthly webinar alternating TAM and TPM. The topic will be TPM and target setting overview. This webinar will cover state target setting approaches, lessons learned leading up to the mid-performance period progress reports. Topics will include target setting in the face of uncertainty and data gaps, coordinating and collaborating on target setting, and improving forecasting approaches. On September 16th, the webinar will focus on TPM communications, and then the November 18th webinar will address system performance management. So please continue to send us ideas for webinars you'd like to see, and we'll put them into the schedule. And again, a final reminder, for more information, you can always visit the AASHTO TPM portal. That's tpm-portal.com. Thank you, everyone. Bye.